I need your favorite quarterback fantasy matchup of the week, Miguel.
It's always great to start off a show with the Dallas Cowboys
How about
and
them?
Dak Prescott. How about them Cowboys, who is the QB2 in week 1 against these New York Giants? And even with Leonard Williams now in the mix, they can't stop Dak Prescott. This is a team that's given up 6 top 9 fantasy quarterback performances this season.
Marcus, let's move this party to Detroit Rock City.
Let's do that. Matthew Stafford, who's actually having a really good season right now. The Lions have been slinging the ball a little more often over the last couple of weeks, facing a Raiders defense that's given up the 3rd most passing yards per game, the 2nd most passing touchdowns. I expect Matt Stafford to go slinging it again.
Cynthia, any running back matchup in particular that's tickling your fancy right about now?
Minnesota Vikings.
Oh.
Why would you not pick the guy who's averaging over 24 fantasy points per game against a team that's giving up the most scrimmage yards to running backs and the 3rd most fantasy points to the position? Why not? Why would you not pick it?
I hope I'm not playing against him in any of my leagues this week.
You probably are.
Hope
He's
not
gonna
either.
crush.
Graham, how about you? Which way are you going?
I'm looking at Le'Veon Bell this week. I know it's been a slog for him out of the gates, but his workhorse role gives him an extremely high floor. And this week he gets to play the Dolphins. You always want to start your guys against the Dolphins. They've given up over 120 scrimmage yards on the ground to opposing running backs now in 4 straight games, and I think Bell makes it 5 here.
Yeah, when your weeks prior to this week are mentioned as a slog, I think you're ready for an improvement. Marcus, how about a wideout match play?
Well, Fabs went with Dak Prescott, so I'm going to go with a guy who's his favorite target in that offense. That's Amari Cooper. He's had 14 or more fantasy points in 5 of 7 games this season. One of the 2 games in which he didn't reach that mark, he left early with an injury, so who knows what might have happened had he played a full 4 quarters. But here's the thing. This is a Cowboy offense that's pivoting more toward being a passing offense, and they're going downfield to Amari Cooper.
And Amari Cooper also looks a lot like Neo. Looks just like him.
yeah.
Never seen the pair in the room at the same time.
Closer.
How about Fabs? Give me a wide receiver.
Yeah, well, let's enter the fantasy matrix here and talk about Tyler
see it.
Lockett. Look at that catch. I mean, you had to be Neo to make that catch, right?
I see it.
He's
Take
got
it
a
back.
great matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. They have given up the 2nd most fantasy points to the slot this season. Lockett runs about 69% of his routes out of the slot. This guy is going to put up a monster stat line against those Bucs.
All right, Graham, finish strong like Morpheus. Give me a tight end play that you love this week.
I will, Cole, and I'm looking at Hunter Henry this week. After he disappointed us last week with just 4 catches and 47 yards, he's in a get-right spot here against this Packers secondary that's just getting absolutely wrecked by tight ends. They've given up the 6th most points per game to the position, and Travis Kelce and Darren Waller both had fantastic games against these Packers, and Hunter Henry's kind of used in a similar fashion as those 2.
Cynthia, a certain tight end that is playing fantasy football with Fabs is playing Fabs' team this week?
Yeah, so you're seeing highlights against the Cowboys from week 1 where he had 28.6 fantasy points. That was his season high. He's your number 5 overall. This is a great matchup for him. It's all about the volume. I know he did get some pass catchers back. You have Golden Tate now, but there's still going to be plenty of opportunities for him to score for you.
But in case you missed
I'm not gonna
this,
push you.
Sean Watson had a minor setback from being kicked in the left eye, just like I wish would have happened to Fabs when
Really?
he no violence, but so much that he's not allowed to make the play ball call in tonight's World Series Game 7 because of being under the lights. Now the Texans, they fly to London tomorrow, and he should be good to go against Jacksonville. So Fabs, you worried because in week 2 the Jags had just under 13 fantasy points?
Unless there is a severe setback, it would be the ultimate sin not to play him. You guys didn't even get that reference, did you?
Is that
It's an Ozzy Osbourne song.
Yeah.
You guys should all be ashamed of yourselves.
I'm not.
Start up.
Not at all. All right, let's move things along once more because in case you missed this, Patrick Mahomes keeps inching closer to a return. He, quote, did a little more today than he did a week ago at Chiefs practice. And Marcus, Matt Moore, not bad for owners who had to turn to him in week 8. So do you like this cat if he starts in place of Project Pat again, taking on Minnesota?
Not really.
No? Okay.
Look, I know Andy Reid had a little bit of extra time to try to scheme some things up for Matt Moore the first time around, but this Vikings defense, kind of a different animal than we saw with the Packers. So Matt Moore may be good enough to kind of keep them in it, but I don't know that I'd start him in my fantasy.
All right, let's keep it going. Because in case you missed this, James Conner did not practice today. Remember, he left the game Monday evening against Miami with that banged up shoulder. Now, you'll want to monitor this one very closely, especially if you have him this week, right, Grant?
Yeah, you have to, and this is looking like it's going to be a game-time call for James Conner this week. Look, James Conner has been a warrior this year. This is now his 4th game where he's ended the game with an injury. He's dealt with quad, ankle, and knee injuries. And it looks like, the Steelers are going to get Jalen Samuels back this week, and he would be the replacement if Connor can't go.
Yeah, and despite Connor's bum shoulder, his air guitar 10,000 times better than Michael Fabiano's. Now, in case you missed this, Cardinals running back David Johnson, he'll be a game-time decision tomorrow evening versus San Francisco with that banged-up ankle. And Chase Edmonds, he's been ruled out with his hamstring. So, Cynthia, they just traded for Kenyon Drake this week. Project for him if owners are desperate for that flex.
Look, if they're desperate for a flex, this is a really good opportunity because of the volume. It's not a good opportunity against the Niners defensive front, but they do give up a decent amount of yards on the ground. So if you're looking for a flex and you're really in a pinch, it's not bad. It's not my favorite, but it's a good upside pick.
Well, you know what time it is, Fabs.
I do.
It's time for start 'em and sit 'em. It's what you do. You're going to give us a starts and sits, and you're going to maybe just throw in a sleeper.
I may
just
do that
fun.
for you,
That's
my
what you
friend.
normally do. You're going to get things started?
Yeah, let's do
All right,
that,
we're going
man.
to start things with running backs.
And we'll do it with Philip Lindsay,
Okay.
who I acquired in a
What?
trade from you. I like him this week.
Okay.
Against the Cleveland Browns. They've allowed 4.6 yards per rushing attempts to running backs. They've also given up 3 top 6 fantasy runners, so Lindsay's a very good play. I'm also starting Jordan Howard. Can you help me here?
Chicago didn't need him.
Coming off a huge game against the Bills. In their last 3 games, there you go. The Bears have allowed 29-plus fantasy points to Josh Jacobs and Latavius Murray. And last week, they gave a touchdown each to Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler. My sleeper?
Who is it?
Mark Walton. How about that? In his first game without Kenyon Drake, he led the Dolphins' backfield in touches and snaps. He also saw 6 targets. The Jets have allowed the 7th most fantasy points to running backs, so Mark Walton's a viable flex this week.
He's going to tell the Jets, good night, John Boy, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
How about running back that you sit? Who is it?
I get it. You probably have to play him. You don't have to like it. David Montgomery's cutting off the best game he's had in his career from a fantasy perspective, but the Eagles have given up an average of fewer than 3 yards per rush and just 19 fantasy points per game. The running backs at the link. This is a bad matchup for the rookie, so if you have depth, you may want to sit him. And also, Sony Michel. Listen to this stat. Michel has averaged just 6.9 fantasy points in games that Rex Burkhead is active. In games he's out, he's averaging 19. Last week, Rex Burkhead was active, and he had 7.4 points. And this is also a tough matchup against the Ravens in Baltimore.
Yeah, that's a good indicator. Listen to that man right there. Okay, let's make the move to wideouts because I need a pair of hands that fantasy owners can count on this week.
Yeah, and you can definitely count on Allen Robinson. As much as I don't like David Montgomery, A-Rob is a very good start. He ranks 9th among wide receivers in targets per game. The Eagles have allowed 10 touchdowns and the most fantasy points to receivers lined out wide. Robinson runs about 61% of his routes in that area. I'm also starting, how about them Cowboys? Michael Gallup. He's got a great matchup this week against the Giants. They have surrendered an average of 15.4 yards per catch and the 6th most fantasy points to receivers lined out wide. Gallup is averaging almost 16 yards per catch, and he runs 83% of his routes out of the slot. Mike, sleeper? Well,
Who is it?
we gave him to you last week, and you hit a home run with it. 2 touchdowns.
Yep.
DK Metcalf. So let's double up on him against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They've given up 7 touchdowns and the 5th most fantasy points to receivers who line out wide. And Metcalf is seeing a lot of opportunities in the red zone.
He was hoping to be a start this week, not a sleeper once again. He's going to ball out for you. He's going to ball out for you.
Starter. How about
okay,
that?
who you sitting, man?
Terry McLaurin, and listen, I get it. He is a great wide receiver. This is a bad spot for him against the Bills and Tre'Davious White, and he might be catching passes from the very erratic Dwayne Haskins, and overall Buffalo has allowed just 2 touchdowns and the 7th fewest fantasy points to receivers lined out wide. And then I'm also sitting, sorry, Jarvis. I mean, I get it. You saw me on Twitter say that you're a sit. You didn't like it, but you're a sit again against the Denver Broncos. I mean, their defense has been tough, giving up an average of just 55 yards per game to the slot. So, Jarvis, sorry, my friend, but I'm benching you.
Did Juice Landry tweet at you because you said you didn't like the
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, he did.
You haven't been watching the show?
Kirk Cousins. This week, he has scored 20-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. The Chiefs' defense has given up 15 total touchdowns to quarterbacks overall, and QBs have averaged over 20 points against the Chiefs at Arrowhead Stadium. I'm also starting Jameis Winston. Yes, he can be Jekyll and Hyde, but hey, I like the matchup against Seattle. They've allowed the 5th most passing yards per game since week 5. They've also allowed a top 14 quarterback in 6 of their 8 games, including 3 quarterbacks in the top 10. My sleeper, I agree with Cynthia and Marcus. I think it could be Jimmy Garoppolo. The Cardinals have allowed 20 touchdown passes, and they have just 2 interceptions all season long. Overall, Arizona has allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So Jimmy G, he could be very useful in Superflex leagues or 2 QB leagues.
Yeah, best start for a San Francisco 49er quarterback since 1990, and Joe Montana. All right, I need some arms to sit because the streak continues. Silky Johnson would love this.
Tell me if you've heard this before.
Oh.
Sit Baker Mayfield. Listen, everybody knows to sit him now. It's just comical at this point. He has not put up the numbers we were hoping back in the preseason, and quarterbacks have thrown for a combined 6 touchdowns and averaged just 10 fantasy points against the Broncos. So Baker, find your spot on the bench or even the waiver wire. I'm also sitting Carson Wentz. He has scored just over 21 fantasy points per game in his last 2 games combined. And the Bears, they've struggled against the run, but QBs have averaged fewer than 14 fantasy points per game against them, and no quarterback has finished higher than 13th against Chicago. So this is a bad matchup for Carson Wentz.
And no quarterback has gone above 20 points against the Chicago Bears and their defensive unit all season
You're very
long. Speaking with the cane.
intimidating, pointing at that stick at
That's how they
everybody
do
over
it
here.
in Chicago. All right, let's take a deep breath and gather yourself because there's some tight ends that we're going to need at least 2 of. This is serious here, Fabs. Let's not laugh
it
this
certainly
off.
is serious.
Dead serious.
Greg Olsen, let me get my composure here.
Okay.
Greg Olsen is a stardom this week, and I get it. The last few weeks he has just not been good, but he has a great matchup against the Titans. They've given up 4 touchdowns and a combined 4 top 9 fantasy tight ends in their first 8 games. So start the veteran and start TJ Hawkinson. No, you did not mishear me. This is a great matchup against the Raiders. They've allowed 6 touchdowns and the 3rd most fantasy points to tight ends. So while the rookie's done really nothing since week 1, this could be the game that he finally is a treat and not a trick.
Oh, okay. He has 5 end zone targets. That's good enough for second on